This data shows how your understanding in a new language grows the more you learn and begins to answer the key question about the time it takes to learn a language. When have you learned enough? Of course, I don't mean when you've learned enough to stop using Duolingo or to drop out of a class, because hopefully you're igniting a long-term relationship of enjoying the language. But when do you hit that critical point when your knowledge and skills give you the ability to navigate a new language so that your progress continues to just snowball? To explain, we'll need a concept called I+1, coined by linguist Stephen Krashen in his input hypothesis. And let's frame our question in a way that leads us into the data. As you learn and read and watch, how much do you need to know so that there's only one thing per sentence that you don't already know? This one unknown per sentence is the perfect atomized way to drive your growth, because your brain is only responsible for one thing at a time. It gives you a specific thing to drive your growth without being overwhelming. The foundation of this idea is that we acquire languages via comprehensible input. That's compelling shows, TV, books, and movies, and any materials in a language that are at or just beyond your current level. This notion of something being just beyond your level is often called I+1 and is one of the pillars of the input hypothesis. You might call this being on the edge of your comfort zone or the zone of proximal development, or let's hear it from Stephen Krashen himself. We acquire by understanding language that contains structure a bit beyond our current level of competence, I+1. I here is talking about what you currently know, and the +1 references anything that's just beyond what you could understand, but hopefully with a little thinking and explanation, you can learn it. Now, let's go explore the data. There are two variables that we're going to play with here. The first is the size of your vocabulary, which presumably increases as you learn more in the language. And the next is the type of content that you're using to immerse, which we also want to make sure we're adjusting so that it matches our current level. Let's stick with the scientific method here and start by first adjusting the size of your vocabulary, but assume that you're working with the same piece of content. Since I'm a big fan of the Easy German YouTube channel and they provide proofread transcripts for their incredibly endearing and helpful videos and interviews, let's use their content. Since there aren't any generalized word lists or models that I'm aware of for how a person's vocabulary grows as they learn a language, let's take the very simplistic assumption that a person learns based on the most common words in a language. So if I say I know 500 words in German, I know the 500 most common words, and same thing, 5,000 words, it's the 5,000 most common ones. So if I know 500 words, then I know all of the individual words in the sentence, I have a car, and the number of unknowns there is 0, so we're not in I+1 territory. But if I say I have a typewriter, that last word is not in the top 500, so there's one word that I don't know, and we've entered I+1 territory, aka the zone of proximal development. But of course, a sentence like I'm in possession of a typewriter would have two unknown words and might be too far outside your reach since you have to focus on a new form of having something and a new noun. The point here is not that you would understand the word possession and typewriter after reading a sentence just once. Heck, in the past, I focused on the fact that according to research, you need to see a word up to 20 times for it to really solidify in your memory and your understanding. But to understand this concept, we're going to say that content that has an average of one new word or grammar concept per sentence is the zone that we want to be in. Let's start with a rough guess that a beginner's vocabulary is 500 words, intermediate is 2,000 words, an advanced student is 5,000 words, and a native speaker is 20,000 words. So now back to that original question. As you learn and your vocabulary grows, how many words do you need to know so that in every sentence, on average, there's only one unknown when you're immersing with content? The x-axis, we have the vocab size, and the y-axis is the average number of unknown words per sentence. Okay, we can sort of see the shape of a curve forming, but what we really care about is the intersection of the curve with this line, where there's an average of one unknown word per sentence. Now we'll do more modeling where we fill in this line with increments of 250 words more vocab to see the full curve. Okay, not too shabby. Looking at that intersection point for the average Easy German content, you'd need a vocabulary size of 2,882 words. That may sound like a lot, but if you're learning a doable 10 new words per day, your vocabulary will hit that in just 9.5 months. And let's be honest, you've probably used Duolingo for that long without seeing these kinds of results. Here's that chart from earlier that helps us define the zone of I+1. As your vocabulary increases, you understand more of a sentence. Easy enough. This axis here is a percent because we're analyzing thousands of sentences with tens of thousands of words. But when we look at one sentence at a time and the average sentence is only 7 words, then each word you know is 14% of a sentence. But when we're looking at thousands of sentences, what that means for this chart is when you get into the top 14% on average, your skills and vocabulary only leave one unknown per sentence. You've entered the zone of proximal development and your skills can begin to snowball according to linguistic theory. Well, as an astute viewer of this channel, you're probably saying to yourself, won't we have a different curve based on what type of content we're immersing in? For example, if you're using beginner content, won't that curve look different than intermediate or advanced content? Or what about if it's spoken versus text? Shifting over to written text at the beginner versus the advanced level, we see an interesting pattern that we also might expect. The texts here are in German and come from the Goethe Institute and similar online resources based around the CEFR, the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. They're the people who define who a beginner and advanced learner are. Once we process all this data, the beginner A1 content requires a vocabulary of 4,000 words to get to our ideal point, while the C1 content requires 11,250 words, which would take around 3 years to hit, assuming our pace of 10 new words per day. Both of these curves for written text are shifted to the right from our easy German example, highlighting that colloquial speech is a different ballgame from the world of testing. Before we move on to how this data can help you improve how you learn languages, Stephen Krashen does offer an interesting counterpoint to this i+1 data and might offer a glimpse of hope if it seems like the timeline or the vocab size is a bit daunting. Krashen writes, a third part of the input hypothesis says that input must contain i+1 to be useful for language acquisition, but it need not contain only i+1. This implies that the best input should not even attempt to deliberately aim at i+1. You could do that, and perhaps it would address some of the inefficiencies that books, TV shows, and podcasts have in their meandering style based on the fact that we humans don't have the oratory precision to match this type of data analysis. But Krashen's point, along with a lot of other linguistic research, is that it doesn't really matter. As long as you continue immersing in the language, i+1 will come eventually and your skills will grow. And I only learned that last point after I downloaded all the transcripts and wrote the code and wrote a full script for this video. But I still found the data exploration very interesting and fun, and here are 4 ways that it can be helpful. Do a sprint to increase your vocabulary as a beginner. Be relentless about laying a foundation in another language. 10 new words a day gets you very far, very fast, and it's manageable. That's 600 words in 2 months or more than 3,500 words in just a year. Like always, based on my experience, I recommend using the free open source note card app Anki, which has the most efficient scheduler so that you can review your cards only when you need to, and you're learning new words in an engaging way that doesn't suck up your time. Up next, pick content to match your level. Like we showed, there is an ideal i+1 zone for different levels. If you have access to graded readers for beginners versus intermediate levels, use them. There are plenty of graded readers for most popular languages, whether that's online or on Amazon, and while I'm not sponsored, I can recommend Ollie Richard's Story Learning. He's got graded readers in like 10 languages, so check the description down below for some affiliate links. That being said, if level-appropriate content will make you give up on wanting to learn a language, then just enjoy whatever will keep you immersing. Explore very judicious use of ChatGPT, whether for stories or vocab. Since ChatGPT doesn't know your vocabulary in another language, your prompt could be, write a short story using the 500 most common words in German, and make sure to include the following challenging words in a way that their meaning is clear from the context. I've been doing something similar to generate individual sentences for German and turning those into closed deletion cards in Anki to activate those words in my vocabulary. It's been quite useful so far. And as always, take ChatGPT's output with a grain of salt, and if possible, have a friend look over the results. And last, just continue immersing with content. Whether or not this i+1 concept is compelling, consider the last point that Krashen brought up. Input must contain i+1 to be useful for language acquisition, but it need not only contain i+1. Don't worry about finding the most efficient path if you just want to enjoy yourself with a hobby like language learning. If you immerse yourself and stick with it with an attentive eye, you will learn. I've learned coding and data science through projects like this over the past couple of years, and it's really scratching the itch of curiosity that I have to always be learning something. And if you want to learn more about coding, data analysis, math, or AI, then I'd recommend checking out the sponsor of today's video, Brilliant. With conceptual and practical courses like this one on programming in Python, Brilliant helps you get smarter every day with problem-solving lessons that have a hands-on approach. It's exactly this type of thinking that I use when I formulate a language learning question that can only be answered with data and coding. Whether it's understanding the concepts underlying programming or writing your own lines of code from day one, you can start analyzing and visualizing data in Brilliant's courses from sources like Airbnb, Spotify, Starbucks, and more. It's exactly skills and projects like these that have helped me analyze the scripts from TV shows or my own vocabulary reviews to become a better language learner. To try out everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, go to brilliant.org/oneword-at-a-time or scan the QR code on the screen or look at the link in the description down below. And if you use my link, you'll also get an extra 20% off of an annual premium subscription. And thank you to Brilliant for partnering on this video. I want your perspective on one last thing that's been bothering me when I was doing research for this video. I used written text when I showed you the chart for the beginner versus advanced curves because something weird was happening with the easy German content. What happened is that their team has dedicated playlists for content based on CEFR. So I pulled some of the beginner content from the A1 playlist and advanced content from the C1 playlist. But when I ran this code, I could not for the life of me figure out why these curves were nearly identical, with the C1 content actually requiring a smaller vocab to reach our ideal point. Here's a little bit of background if it helps. The sentences from the C1 list are a little bit longer at 8.5 words on average versus 6.5 words from the beginner A1 list. The videos in these playlists are largely hosted by the same people, but the topics are varied. My main theory is that the level playlists are focused on beginner versus advanced topics, but we're still just having conversations about things overall. And maybe because the advanced C1 videos have a few more interviews included, the more colloquial language offsets the more academic discussions taking place in the intro A1 courses. Help? That's all I've got for this one. If you enjoy this type of content, please do subscribe, and thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.